The bedroom felt like a sanctuary tonight, a quiet corner carved out of the restless hum of the coastal city beyond my balcony. I stood before the mahogany wardrobe, its double doors flung wide, revealing rows of silk nightgowns, velvet robes, and tailored dresses, each a testament to a life I'd built with care. The salty Pacific breeze slipped through the open glass, brushing my bare arms and stirring the faint lavender of my perfume. Outside, the California skyline glowed amber, a patchwork of lights flickering against the autumn dusk. It was a view I'd seen 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different, alive, almost daring me to step into its pulse. I was getting ready for a blind date, a rarity arranged through some exclusive service I'd signed up for on a whim. My fingers hovered over a sapphire robe, its sheen catching the lamplight, then drifted to a cream silk slip that whispered against my skin as I lifted it. I'm a woman who thrives on control. Every room I design as an interior decorator is a masterpiece of intention. But tonight, that certainty wavered. Who was I dressing for? The question hung there, unanswered, as I sifted through the hangers. The wardrobe's elegance, usually a comfort, felt like a mask slipping, exposing a flicker of doubt I hadn't expected. I reached for a black velvet dress, holding it against me, the fabric cool and heavy. Too formal, I muttered, tossing it onto the bed. Then a sheer emerald nightgown caught my eye. Bold, daring, not my usual choice. I hesitated, my reflection in the full-length mirror showing a woman poised but uncertain, her dark hair falling in loose waves over one shoulder. The city's distant hum seeped in, a reminder of the world waiting beyond these walls, and I wondered if I was ready for it. That's when the door creaked open. I turned, startled, my breath catching as Lucas stood there, framed in the doorway. My stepson, tall, broad-shouldered, his architect's sketch pad tucked under one arm, looked as surprised as I felt. His hazel eyes widened, darting from me to the silk still dangling in my hand. Grace, I didn't know you were here, he stammered, a flush creeping up his neck. He shifted his weight, the hardwood floor groaning faintly under his boots. I forced a smile, quick to steady myself. It's fine, Lucas. What's on your mind? My voice was calm, though my pulse wasn't. I'd raised him since he was a gangly teenager, after his father, my late husband, passed. He was family, yet here he was, an intrusion in this private moment, his presence filling the room in a way I hadn't anticipated. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing away from the wardrobe's open display. I wanted to ask about the firm's new project, some coastal villa renderings, but it can wait. His gaze flicked back to me, then to the emerald silk, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not the boy I'd known, but a man, steady and searching. No, stay, I heard myself say, the words surprising me as much as they did him. I set the nightgown down, smoothing its folds on the dresser. Maybe you can help me pick something. It was a reckless offer, born from that flicker of uncertainty, but I couldn't take it back. Not now. Lucas's brows lifted, a mix of curiosity and hesitation crossing his face. Help you pick? He echoed, stepping closer, his boots soft against the rug. The air seemed to tighten, the lavender and salt mingling with the faint scent of his cologne. Something woody, grounding. He set his sketch pad on the chaise by the balcony, his hands free now, and nodded. All right, what's the occasion? A date, I said simply, watching his reaction. His jaw tightened for a split second, then relaxed into a small, crooked smile. Lucky guy, he replied, his tone light but his eyes steady. He moved toward the wardrobe, his fingers brushing the edge of a velvet robe before pausing. Something bold, then, like you. I tilted my head, caught off guard by the ease of his words. You think I'm bold? I asked, crossing my arms, the silk of my robe brushing my skin. He glanced over his shoulder, meeting my gaze. I've seen your designs, Grace. You don't play it safe. His voice was low, deliberate, and for a moment the room felt smaller, the city's hum fading to a whisper. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded, stepping aside to let him take the lead. Whatever happened next, I wasn't in control anymore, and part of me didn't want to be. The bedroom glowed under the soft amber of the table lamp, shadows swaying gently across the cream walls as the ocean breeze tugged at the curtains. My wardrobe stood open like a confession, its contents spilling out in a cascade of silk and velvet, each piece a quiet story of who I'd become. Lucas lingered near it, his broad frame casting a shadow that stretched toward me. The air felt heavier now, laced with the salt of the coast and the faint musk of his presence, a contrast to the lavender I'd dabbed on my wrists earlier. I stood by the chaise, arms crossed, watching him take in the array of choices I'd left scattered, dresses and robes I'd second-guessed all evening. He reached out, his fingers grazing the sleeve of a black velvet dress I'd tossed aside. "This one's strong," he said, his voice steady, thoughtful, "but maybe too heavy for tonight." He let it fall back, moving to a silver satin gown that shimmered like moonlight on water. "This could work." He held it up, turning to me with a raised brow, waiting. I stepped behind the folding screen in the corner, its carved wood shielding me as I slipped out of my robe. The satin slid over my skin, cool and smooth, hugging my curves with a quiet elegance. I stepped out, smoothing the fabric over my hips, and caught his nod. "It's good," he said, leaning against the wardrobe. "Classy. You'd own the room." His eyes lingered a moment, then flicked away, as if he'd caught himself. "Thanks," I replied, adjusting the neckline in the mirror, "but it's not quite right." I disappeared behind the screen again, shedding the satin for something else, a deep plum dress with a slit that grazed my thigh. When I emerged, his smile was quick, genuine. "That's more you," he said, crossing his arms, bold but not loud. I twirled once, the hem brushing my legs, and felt a flicker of warmth at his words. We went on like that, a strange dance of fabric and feedback. He'd hand me something, a tailored blazer, a flowing ivory skirt, and I'd try it on, stepping out to his quiet appraisals. "Too safe," he'd say, or "That's got edge." His taste surprised me, sharp and sure, like the lines he sketched for his buildings. The pile on the bed grew, a tangle of discarded options, until his hand paused over the emerald nightgown I'd eyed earlier. Its sheer fabric gleamed, the hem short enough to whisper secrets, the neckline plunging just enough to tease. "This one," he said, holding it out. His voice dropped, a low rumble that made the room feel smaller. I took it, our fingers brushing for a heartbeat, and retreated behind the screen. The silk slipped on like a second skin, clinging to my waist, the hem grazing my thighs. I hesitated, glancing at myself in the mirror, bare shoulders, the faint outline of my form beneath the green. It was daring, more than I'd planned, but his choice felt like a challenge. When I stepped out, the air shifted. Lucas straightened, his sketchpad forgotten on the chaise. His gaze swept over me, slow and deliberate, not the quick glances of before. "You look stunning," he said, the words rough around the edges, like he'd held them back too long. I felt the silk shift against me, the room's warmth pressing in, and my breath hitched. "You've got an eye for this," I teased, adjusting a strap, my fingers trembling just enough to betray me. He smirked, stepping closer, the floor creaking faintly. "Years of watching you design, I guess." His eyes locked on mine, and I caught his reflection in the mirror behind me, taller than I remembered, his jaw set, the boy I'd known replaced by someone steadier, deeper. "It's perfect for tonight," he added, his voice softer now, almost a murmur. "Whoever he is, he won't stand a chance." I laughed, a quick sound that broke the tension, but only for a moment. "You're too kind," I said, turning to the mirror again, smoothing the silk over my hips. His shadow loomed behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, though he didn't move. "You think it's enough?" I asked, meeting his gaze in the glass. "More than enough," he replied, his tone carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. The city's hum faded beyond the balcony, leaving just us, me in the emerald silk he'd chosen, him standing there, watching me like I was a blueprint he'd finally figured out. The line between us, the one I'd drawn years ago as his stepmother, blurred into something new, something I couldn't name. And as I stood there, the nightgown a whisper against my skin, I wondered if I'd invited more than just his opinion into this room. I stepped out into the night, the emerald nightgown hidden beneath a long trench coat, its belt cinched tight around my waist. My heels clicked against the driveway, a sharp rhythm cutting through the cool autumn air. The coastal city sprawled before me, a tapestry of neon signs blinking to life, and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. The breeze carried the tang of salt and the faint sweetness of jasmine from the garden, tugging at the hem of my coat as I moved toward the curb. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark now, a silent witness to the moment I'd left behind. I raised a hand, and a cab rolled up, tires hissing on the damp pavement. Sliding into the back seat, I caught the driver's glance in the rearview mirror, a quick flicker of appreciation before he turned his eyes to the road. "The bistro on Cliffside," I said, settling against the leather, the nightgown silk brushing my skin beneath the coat. The cab lurched forward, weaving through the city's arteries, past glowing storefronts and the silhouettes of people hurrying home. The lights blurred outside the window, streaks of gold and red against the deepening blue of dusk. But my mind wasn't on the view. Lucas lingered there instead, his hands on the emerald silk, the way his eyes had traced me in the bedroom. I shifted, crossing my legs, and felt the fabric move with me, a reminder of his choice. I'd raised him since he was 16, a lanky kid with his father's smile, and I'd built walls to keep things simple, clear. Stepmother, stepson, roles etched in stone. But tonight those walls trembled, cracked by the heat in his gaze, the quiet confidence in his voice. "You look stunning," he'd said, and I couldn't shake it, the way it settled under my skin. The cab turned down a quieter street, the ocean's rhythm growing louder through the cracked window. I pressed my fingers to the glass, cool against my warmth, and tried to focus. "This is just a date," I murmured to myself, barely audible over the engine's hum. Lucas was helping, that's all. But the words felt hollow, drowned by the memory of his shadow behind me, the way the room had shrunk around us. I'd walked out before it could go further, coat buttoned, heels on, but I hadn't escaped the pull. We pulled up to the bistro, its understated facade glowing softly under a simple sign, Cliffside, etched in elegant cursive. I handed the driver a crisp bill, his "Good evening, ma'am," trailing me as I stepped onto the curb. The air was crisp here, tinged with sea mist, a sharp contrast to the cab's stuffy warmth. My coat flared as I walked to the entrance, heels tapping a steady beat, each step a tether to the woman I'd always been. Grace, the designer, the widow, the one who held the reins. Yet tonight, I felt them slipping. Inside, the bistro hummed with low chatter, the clink of glasses, the faint wail of a saxophone from a corner quartet. The hostess led me to a secluded table near the back, its velvet banquette tucked against a window overlooking the cliffs. I slid in, unbuttoning my coat just enough to breathe, the nightgown silk cool against my thighs. A waiter appeared, and I ordered a glass of Cabernet, its deep red catching the candlelight as he set it down. I took a sip, the rich warmth spreading through me, and stared out at the ocean's dark expanse. Lucas's face flickered in my mind again, those hazel eyes, the crooked smile he'd flashed when I'd twirled in the plum dress. "Bold, but not loud," he'd said, and I'd felt seen, stripped bare in a way that had nothing to do with the clothes. I traced the stem of my glass, the wine's heat doing little to quiet the flutter in my chest. I'd left him standing in my bedroom, sketchpad in hand, but he'd followed me here, a ghost in my thoughts. The date was minutes away, some stranger vetted by an app, but all I could think of was the man I'd left behind, the one who'd handed me this nightgown like a key to something I hadn't meant to unlock. The bistro's velvet banquette cradled me as I sat, the Cabernet's warmth lingering on my tongue. Candlelight flickered across the table, casting a golden glow that danced with the soft strains of jazz weaving through the air. The window beside me framed the cliffs, their jagged edges swallowed by the night, the ocean a restless murmur below. I traced the rim of my glass, the silk of the emerald nightgown shifting beneath my coat with every breath. The hum of conversation around me, low, intimate, felt distant, my thoughts still tangled in the bedroom in Lucas's steady gaze. The minutes stretched, each tick of the unseen clock tightening the knot in my stomach. I wasn't nervous, not usually. Years of client meetings and late-night designs had steadied my nerves, but tonight was different. The app had promised a match, cultured, refined, someone to match my world. I glanced at the entrance, half expecting a stranger in a tailored suit, when a shadow fell across the table. I looked up and my breath caught, sharp and sudden. Lucas stood there, his broad frame outlined by the bistro's dim light, hazel eyes locking onto mine. He wore a dark jacket over a crisp shirt, hands in his pockets, a slow smile curving his lips. "Surprised?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the jazz. He slid into the seat across from me before I could answer, leaning forward, elbows on the table. My mind reeled. How? But then it clicked. The app. He'd found me. "Lucas?" I whispered, half question, half shock. My fingers tightened around the wine glass. "What are you doing here?" He tilted his head, that crooked smile deepening. "I'm your date, Grace. Hope you don't mind the twist." He paused, watching me, then added, "I saw your profile pop up. Couldn't let some stranger have this night." I stared at him, the bistro fading to a blur. The man I'd raised, the boy who'd once spilled paint on my sketches, was here, across from me, his presence bold and unapologetic. "This is crazy," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, the words spilling out as I tried to grasp the moment. "Maybe," he replied, leaning closer, his gaze unwavering. "But I'm not walking away." He gestured to the waiter, ordering a bourbon, then turned back to me. "Gimme tonight. Let's see where it goes." I should have said no, should have stood and left, but something in his eyes, sincere, unguarded, held me there. I lifted my glass, a silent toast. "To whatever this is," I said, and he clinked his tumbler against mine, the sound a soft promise. The evening unfolded in layers, each course peeling back the years between us. He talked about his dreams, sustainable homes along the coast, structures that blended with the earth. "I want to build something that lasts," he said, swirling his bourbon. "Not just for me, but for the people who live in it." I shared stories of my own, early days staging homes, the thrill of a perfect design coming together. "It's about making a space feel alive," I told him, and he nodded, like he'd always understood. Laughter came easy, his dry humor catching me off guard. "Remember when I tried to help you with that beach house project?" he asked, grinning. "You ended up with sand in your blueprints." "And you ended up grounded," I shot back, smiling despite myself. But the silences grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. His hand brushed mine as he reached for the breadbasket, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through me. "I've seen you tonight, Grace," he said, his voice dropping. "Really seen you." My pulse raced, the nightgown silk a secret between us. "Lucas, I started, but he cut me off, his hand resting over mine now, firm and warm. "We're two people here," he said. "Not what we were." His thumb grazed my knuckles, and I didn't pull away. The bistro's chatter faded, the world shrinking to the space between us. The candles flicker, the heat of his skin, the weight of his words. He leaned back, breaking the contact, but his eyes stayed on me, steady, searching. The meal ended with a shared dessert, a dark chocolate tart we split, forks clinking. "Your trouble," I said, licking a crumb from my lip, and he laughed, low and rich. "Only if you let me be," he replied, his gaze tracing my mouth. The check came, and he paid, his movements casual but deliberate. He stood, offering his hand. "Ready for the rest of the night?" I took it, my fingers curling into his, and stepped into whatever came next, the ocean's whisper following us out. Lucas's Mustang waited outside the bistro, its black curves gleaming under the streetlights like a shadow carved from the night. He opened the passenger door, his hand brushing mine as I slid onto the leather seat. The coolness a sharp contrast to the warmth still buzzing through me from dinner. The emerald nightgown shifted beneath my coat. A secret pressed against my skin, and I caught his glance, quick, knowing, before he shut the door and circled to the driver's side. The engine roared to life, a low growl that vibrated through the seat, and we pulled away, the coastal city slipping past in a blur of neon and mist. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, close enough that I could feel the heat of him. The tinted windows cocooned us, shutting out the world. The cliffs looming dark on one side, the ocean's restless shimmer on the other. I leaned back, the leather creaking softly, and watched the headlights slice through the fog. "Nice car," I said, breaking the quiet, my voice lighter than I felt. "Built it up myself," he replied, glancing at me with that crooked smile. "Piece by piece. Took years." His fingers flexed on the wheel, steady and sure, and I pictured him in a garage, sleeves rolled up, coaxing life from metal. It fit him. Patient, deliberate, a man who made things last. We talked as the miles rolled by, the city's hum fading behind us. He told me about the first house he'd designed. A tiny cabin up the coast, all glass and cedar. "I slept on the floor that first night," he said, laughing. "No furniture, just the sound of the waves." I shared a memory of my own, redesigning a widow's home after a storm, turning chaos into calm. "She cried when I showed her the sketches," I said, and he nodded like he knew the weight of that. The conversation drifted. Favorite old movies, the time he broke his arm skateboarding at 15, my late-night coffee runs during crunch deadlines. Each story pulled us closer, stitching over the years that had kept us apart. His laugh rumbled low, a sound that settled in my chest, and I found myself smiling too, the Cabernet's glow still softening my edges. But beneath it all, something simmered, a current I couldn't ignore. His hand left the gear shift, finding mine where it rested on my knee. His thumb grazed my knuckles, slow and deliberate, and my breath hitched. "You're quiet," he said, eyes still on the road, the dashboard lights carving shadows across his jaw. "Just thinking," I murmured, staring at our hands, his calluses rough against my skin. The nightgown clung to me, a whisper of silk he'd chosen, and I wondered if he could sense it through the coat. He pulled off the main road, the Mustang easing onto a quiet overlook, the engine idling as the ocean stretched out below us, dark and endless. He turned to me then, cutting the headlights, the world shrinking to the dim glow of the dash. "Grace," he said, his voice a low thrum that matched the pulse in my ears. "I've wanted you for years." Before I could answer, he leaned in, his lips capturing mine. Slow at first, a question I answered by pressing back. My hands gripped his jacket, the wool rough under my fingers, and the kiss deepened, urgent and searching. The night closed in, the Mustang's leather cool against my back. As I shifted closer, his hand slid to my waist, tugging me toward him, and I felt the heat of him through the coat, the silk beneath it a fragile barrier. I pulled him in, my fingers threading through his hair, the taste of bourbon on his tongue mingling with the wine on mine. The world outside, the cliffs, the waves, the city, vanished, leaving just us, tangled in a moment I hadn't planned but couldn't stop. His jacket fell open, my hands finding the warmth of his chest through his shirt, the steady beat beneath it. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against mine, breath ragged. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice raw. But I didn't. I couldn't. I pulled him back, the nightgown's hem riding up as I pressed against him, the car a sanctuary where rules dissolved. The engine ticked softly, cooling in the dark, and the ocean's rhythm echoed outside, a counterpoint to the storm building within. I knew this was a line crossed, a path I'd never meant to take, but as his hands roamed, reverent, bold, I let it carry me, the night stretching ahead like the road we'd left behind.